Hi everyone, I'm Curt Doolittle for the Natural Law Institute. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Yes. Now, it's kind of impressive to me that we can pull people from all over the world to come to Fredericksburg, Texas, which is not easy to get to, but it's quite pretty here. Yes. All right, I have a sort of difficult job today. I don't do reductions, right? I do research, and I do research at a painfully granular level, more enough to make your brains wilt and eyes bleed, and my own as well. And that's part of the problem with giving this talk, is that I basically wrote a book to write this presentation. And then I'm trying to make a presentation from the book I just wrote, so to speak. And because I wanted, when I say something, I have to be, as Brad will testify over and over again, my degree of comfort with saying this is true is far and beyond that of other people. So I have to have extraordinary confidence, which is why Brad will sit there on some of these videos with a smile on his face, waiting for me, knowing he's correct, and waiting for me to make sure that I falsified it from every direction until I agree with him, and so that he can chuckle and say, I know. As in anything, you don't come, if you want the me to answer a question, you're going to get the 3-hour version. If you want to get the 20-minute version or 15-minute version, you can go to Moritz. If you want the sentence-long version, you go to Martin. And if you want the 3-word version, you go to Brandon. All right, and so it is as best I can reduce all the crap I've written about this subject over the past 20 years. So I think this is a pretty hard presentation for me to give. So I'm going to ask a little bit of your patience. I can't thumb on this, can I? No. A little bit of your patience in advance. And if we feel like we need to take a break or whatever, that'd be great. If you have questions, it's okay to interrupt me if I've stopped speaking to take a breath. But if it's going to require a longer question or I'm going to address it, I'll probably say so at that point. In other words, rather than a presentation, it's a little more like a university lecture. Is that understandable to everyone? All right. So most of us have been, I mean, you know, when you go to college, the first year they put you in all these courses that are really they admit twice as many freshmen as they think will survive, because that's where they get their profit from, is all the freshmen who drop out. All right, and so you have these, Brandon's shaking his head, pissed off, right? But that's why you go to these big lecture halls when you're young, is that's where the money comes in to pay for the year. Anyway, I'm going to give you the basic outline, is that I'm going to set up the context, briefly cover the present condition. I don't think with this audience I need to talk about the lament of today too deeply. I mean, we all know what this is. Then we're going to go into how we got here. That's really going to be the core insight of it. And then I'm going to give basically a coverage of how all revolutions come about and why this one is slightly different. And I'm going to talk about the emergence of an age of discord and how this comes about historically. And then I'm going to give a lovely dissertation on the various means of revolution and civil war, both historically and in the modern views. And I'm going to do that because I need to emphasize we don't have the same choices that have been available in the past. And I want to drill that in because while I think Moritz covered you can't look to the past too much, and I think Brandon tried to get across that we're actually pretty revolutionary in what we do. I think it's important to understand there aren't an infinite field of possibilities for us to bring about a change, and there isn't a lot of choice in whether we bring about a change. And so I'm going to try to cover those issues, and hopefully you won't get too bored with me talking during the time period. I expect to lose my voice, by the way. Then I'm going to cover the possible means of conflict that would occur in the U.S. I've been insufficiently disciplined or thoughtful to include Europe in this, but there's nothing I say here that doesn't apply to Europe as well. In fact, the size of European countries, it makes it far easier than it is anywhere, anything else. But I am going to cover the not so nice ways all the way up into the nice way, because the Institute's position is that if we don't have a revolution, in other words, we don't get a reformation, we're going to have a civil war. It's not an opinion. All the criteria in history that match up show we're going to have one. And because in fact, there's never been a better example of everything going wrong at the same time than this one. And there's never been a civilization other than Rome that's so overextended and so diluted. Then I'm going to say why we want to choose to have a revolution instead of a civil war of collapse, explain our solution, and then the choice. So there's a bit of, in other words, what you expect in most presentations is basically excitement, advocacy, and reduction of something to what you can understand. But that's not what I do, right? We have people in the organization who bring across the emotional, the rational, the moral, right? We have it, but my job is to do the science. To some degree, Martin says, when you get Martin's, you'll see his take is, yeah, he's to the right of me, definitely.
Almost everyone here is.
So in any event, what I'm going to do my best job to do the education here, but it is actually an educational lecture. And the reason is we don't need you as people who are interested just to say, hey, these guys are cool and the other on the road. Right? We need everybody possible to understand when you're in a conversation with somebody, why it is what we're recommending is what is the best solution, even if it might not be the only solution. All right, does that make sense to everyone? So what do I want to get across to you today? I've sort of given you the outline, but I'm going to sort of reduce this to a basic or fundamental statement, which is there are theories of civil conflict, civil war, civilization, national, political, and civilizational cycles. These theories have been going on since the Greeks. There's nothing going on here. And I'm going to show that our solution is a novel and really simple one, and it is why the law is effective. Our law is effective. The natural law is effective in doing it. So to start with, I'm going to get a little behavioral economics via Brad. Human beings seek to acquire. Human beings don't want to learn a new way to acquire. Human opportunities become exhausted in a market of opportunities. In other words, we do exhaust sets of opportunities. Human expectations exceed the capacity of the marketplace. Humans, unfortunately, double down on their previous behavior rather than adapt. I promised Brad I wouldn't put up text walls, or that I wouldn't read text walls, so I'm trying to avoid that. I promised Bryan that I would try to put pauses in here for emotional sentences to add. I have a lot of promises I got to fulfill when I'm talking to you guys today. The problem is this one that Brad keeps bringing up as the doubling down phenomenon. It's the economics of human cognition are that any reorganization is expensive, and people avoid doing it. And if you're in this room, you're probably cognitively adaptive. But there are a lot of people that are not. And most people are not, and certainly most women are not. And so we have this issue that people tend to double down on this, double down on what they already know. The humans become stressed, they will lower their tolerance for reciprocity. In other words, why don't I kill you and take your stuff? Right, which is the first principle of ethics. Why don't I kill you and take your stuff? Right, the first principle of philosophy is why don't you commit suicide? So the marketplace is a social expression of networks of cooperation that would generate the social phenomena that results in demand for ages of reorganization. In other words, People resist change until they have no other choice. And finally, there's an eternal process. This is an eternal process unless the polity and society are organized. This is profoundly important. Unless the society and polity are organized for the continuous discovery of new opportunities which prevent the cycles of discord. So this is the underlying physics of how cycles of growth, decline, and collapse occur. They happen because we're talking about neural economies adapting in a world of increasing complexity. All right, so why is it that Europeans were able to outdevelop every other civilization despite being a small population on the edge of the Bronze Age? Why is it that if you get to a step, they invent a new political system, which is completely not understood by, I think, other than us? Why is it that they develop reason and philosophy in Greece? Why do the Romans develop legal bureaucracy? Why do the Germanics preserve individual sovereignty and eschew the concentration of authority? Why did the British invent the modern rule of law state? And why did Americans codify the rule of law state? And why does that rule of law state vary so little from the natural law? Why is it that we can come along 200 years later and discover, hell, there are only a dozen holes in the Constitution, and if those are filled, it's a statement of social science? So we're trying to reframe history as this natural progression. And we're trying to talk about how to assist that natural progression in not reaching crises and ages of conflict, ages of discord, and ages of collapse. I want to frame what goes on in humanity as simple neural economy. People are just neurons at scale, and society is just neurons at scale. And I think, Brad, you got anything to say about that? Because for you, even as someone in the medicine field, that was kind of surprising, the degree to which it's true. So the neural economy of adaptation is quite expensive when you have to coordinate lots of neurons and lots of heads to work together by predicting about the same thing or predicting things that are compatible with one another so that we can actually cooperate and synchronize our efforts despite this huge complexity of human differences. And this is an important fact because one of the issues we reiterate all the time is that, there are the difference between the most humans is merely the difference between the overlap of sexual intuitions, right? Sexual biases. The second one is just the one we're not allowed to talk about, which is neoteny, with neotenic evolution. So if you look at neotenic evolution, you look at the distribution of the sexes, all that's left is genetic load, and you end up with the classes. So that sounds like it's being critical that we're not equal. It's actually wrong. It's the same way as being wrong about the women and men being opposites or identical. We're actually compatible. Men and women divide the labor of time and space into, we divide it. Women do the empathic, immediate, experiential, and interpersonal, and men do the intertemporal, the systematic, and the external. And so it's a cooperative system. So what we're trying to get across is that when we say things that sound like we're advancing inequality, well, first of all, we aren't equal, but second, that's how we compute opportunities across time and space. That's why humans can adapt this way instead of the physical way. That's why we can evolve from what we did to today in 300,000 years, and most of it in just 10,000 years. Well, there's one problem with that, is that the rate of our adaptation at this point is exceeding the tolerance for people to adapt themselves with some confidence that they can predict the future. The only way Think of it this way. The only way to get people to work together in a world of continuous evolutionary velocity is if their system of measurement, despite their wants and their division of time, begins to converge. So what we've done is we've produced the science of that convergence so that people can cooperate at scale. Now, I can tell you this, because you're fellow nerds, most of you, or you wouldn't be here, because it takes a certain kind of person to be fascinated by the great systematic behaviors of mankind. And so, but my job is to talk to you, and your job is to talk to everyone else, right? Or as many people as you can, because there are markets that need to hear this message differently. But in the terms of the physics of it, it's really simple, right? It's a really simple problem of neurons working together, divide the labor of time and space to discover opportunities by the use of a distributed population, both in age, geography, sex bias, and somewhat ability, which is classes, in order to discover every freaking possible opportunity for human acquisition and improvement at all times. Unfortunately, as I was saying, what we're trying to do is make it possible for people to converge. But we're not doing it in the positiva. We're not saying, you must think this way. We're simply providing a standard of measurement so that you can truthfully negotiate the costs and trade-offs between people in this vast complexity of sexual differences, neotenic differences, genetic load differences, geographic differences, and everything else, and technological, social, institutional differences. But what happens when, how many people know our triangle, right? Right, there's only three means of coercion, of influence and coercion. There's the feminine seduction. See, I did it already. Feminine seduction, sedition, masculine force defense, what we call ascendant male trade boycott. Right, there's only three means of weapons of influence. Everything humans do is in this place. So the problem is that you can now tell the truth within that space, or you can lie within that space. And so what happens when an elite comes along, which happens in every civilization? There's always going to be an elite. Meaning, what's one of the reasons that we need the division of labor is so you can afford to develop specialists, who each layer of specialists basically is thinking about further points ahead in time and space. So if we're going to develop elites in any situation, but what happens if those elites aren't working to advance truth and reciprocity and sovereignty and productivity, but those elites are looking for self-interest at the expense of others? Does that ever not happen? Come on, you can say, I'll say no. Right? We always get elites. The second thing is, if you're wealthy enough to produce elites, you generate demand for more elites. But are they elites? What's the difference between aristocracy and elite? What's the difference between demonstrated competency and credentialism? That's the difference. All right. So in every civilization, the spectrum of elites serve their self-interest at the expense of the population, and they do so by false claims under a pretense of plausible deniability. Does that make sense? Does anybody not understand what those words mean? I think I use them pretty often, so they should sink in. And our institutions are insufficiently defensive against those, despite our efforts, and especially the efforts of our Anglo and American forefathers and their attempts to prevent the commercial state and church interests at the expense of the people. Now, most of us are still in the Christian ethic. Although the Christians disagree with me, I consider myself a Christian. I was raised in the Catholic Church, even though I'm pretty much a Tory when it comes down to it. The church was terribly corrupt. The state was less corrupt than the church, believe it or not. And the worst people of all were often the financiers. So our forefathers tried to set up, or our founders tried to set up this situation where none of those people could impose their rents on others. And so they set up this market competition to prevent it. But what's the system of measurement they use to prevent it? Or put correctly, what is the system of measurement that they had available to them at that point? They had tradition. They had experience. The guys who wrote the first Constitution here in the United States, they were some of the smartest and best read men in the world. So they had something to work from, but did they have a science of measurement? They didn't. So what's the granularity that they could suppress? Is they could suppress their system of to the capacity of their system of measurement. For those of us who understand, what is the capacity of our system of measurement? Yeah, you're not getting out of the hole. It's not happening. So what we're asking you to do, and we're asking you to propagate, and we're asking ourselves to bring out in the world, to reframe our understanding of the world from these political, moral, theological, philosophical, and ideological biases. Remember, those biases, those frames, are systems of measurement. Isn't all language a system of measurement? Isn't every paradigm within a language a system of measurement? Isn't every of those macro grammars, the theological, philosophical, rational, empirical, and what we would call ourselves as operational, computational, isn't each of those a system of measurement? But what's different about those systems of measurement? Precision. What's permitted within the paradigm? Does that mean that theology is wrong? It's different from false. Does it mean it's wrong? No. Does it mean philosophy is wrong? No. It might not be true, but it's not necessarily wrong. Does it mean empiricism is wrong? No. It might not be true, but it might also not be wrong, right? When you get to computation, you're sort of at the end of the road. If we can construct it from the laws of the universe, that's what true is. So we've produced a system of measurement. It's important that we say that we understand what it is we're doing and why. Because what we're going to be interpreted as producing another ideology, another philosophy. We're not. We're doing the same thing Kepler and Newton did to the planets, what Watson, Crick, and Darwin did to biology, we're doing to human cooperation, or we call the behavioral sciences. What that means is that we're not saying good or bad, right or wrong. We're saying true and false, that's great, but because we're also including the behavioral sciences, we're saying moral and reciprocal, and immoral and irreciprocal and criminal. So you understand what our system of measurement has done. Our system of measurement isn't about preference. It isn't about just reduction of truth. It says in addition, because this is important, because science is stuck in this model, that's why they're blocked, is that we've reduced the system of measurement to not whether you're wrong, not whether it's false, in other words, you just made an error, not whether you're wrong, not whether you're biased, but whether you're criminal. So as an organization, we're introducing this system of measurement, of decidability and accountability that extends this suppression of the simple, direct criminality all the way from the soft or near, the proximal, to the remote. We've extended the ability to suppress all criminality at all scales. And this helped. The reason we're in our boat right now is really easy to understand once you get that. Is that the system of measurement has not existed for people to be able to produce laws, even in a system that is the common law, which you would think because it's just based on you, and you in different jurisdictions coming to the same conclusion. In other words, common law just basically means empirical. And the reason what's the decidability in common law, well, it's tort and equity, tort meaning trespass, and equity meaning, well, we got to think about this because there's some subtlety stuff here. We got to make sure we've got to think it through. So we've created a system of measurement that allows us to detect criminality at not only the historical scales, but the scales that our ancestors used markets to try to circumvent. We have built a system we can use court to defeat. Not only courts, but all the things that derive from legislation and court and regulation. In other words, we don't tell people of the 30,000 goods this group can come up with, which one. That's none of our business, to be honest with you. We don't tell you if you want to live this category of life or this or that or whatever, go ahead, let 1,000 nations bloom. We only say that you can't lie to me. If you lie to me, I'm going to catch you. If I can catch you, I'm going to try to prosecute you. And we're going to create the market for the suppression of criminality at a scale we haven't been able to do before. It's this frame, this understanding of what we're doing at this level of sophistication that is so hard to communicate to people about how important our work is. We are as important in social and behavioral, social, economic, and political science. We are as important as Darwin and Watson and Crick in biology and genetics. We are as important as Smith and Hume in the evolution of the trade of nations. We are as important as Aquinas in the synthesis of Christianity and Greek wisdom. We're as important as the Aristotle Platonic divide, in other words, the empirical versus the moral divide. We're as important, or the analytic and then versus the narrative as the correct frame divide. That's how important what we're doing is. But how do we tell people that? It's a hard thing to explain. And now think about it, it's even worse. You're Darwin in an age of churches, when the Industrial Revolution is creating conflict. Darwin's in this position of, shit, they might hang me. I mean, they did Socrates, right? They almost did Aristotle. They almost did Galileo. Why wouldn't they try to hang?
They can't if we hang them first.
I did not see that coming. So I think it's while you might think I'm slightly arrogant, which I got disciplined by a couple of you the other day. Oh, Michael, where are you? He's not paying attention to me, so it doesn't matter.
What's the point? Do you want me to discipline you further? I'm trying to lay low so that you don't catch more of it.
But the answer is, I completely understand, and I have compassion and empathy for the problem the public faces and understanding what we're bringing. I'm compassionate for the fact that people really would like to believe these pleasant falsehoods. I understand that the Abrahamic religion, which if you haven't seen mine and Martin's talk, you got to watch. Martin is slightly less nice than I am. So you have to listen to both of us, because then he fills in all the things that I'm wrong about because I'm too nice. But if you have heard my talk on Abrahamism, like the two things I covered in the past summer conference were the feminine means of cognition and its consequence, and the Abrahamic escalation of that into a system of warfare. Right? If you understand that's what's happened, great. Make sure I'm not going to go too far off track here. So we are in a position where we need that level of precision in our system of measurement to crush that kind of law, that kind of crime, because that kind of crime isn't masculine. It's not from the male world. It's not from violence and force and theft, very visible things. It's almost criminality by not even fraud, but invisibility. It's criminality by false promise. So you can understand why people want to believe those false promises. You can empathize with, gee, it would be nice if that were true. Equality would be a nice thing. We'd all die within a few years, but in theory, it's a nice thing. It would be nice if we could redistribute almost everything equally, equality of outcome. We'd all die in a couple of years, but it's a nice thought. So I don't commiserate with them. The second thing is, once you grasp that, there's only two dimensions to build humans from, the irresponsible female and the responsible male, an irresponsible hyper-consuming female in time, and the responsible hyper-capitalizing male over time, you understand that all these complexities emerge as this incredible, incredible matrix of opportunity for lying that needs an incredibly precise means of outlawing an increasingly subtle means of crime. He says to me, well, what did you say? We all agree. I can't remember what you said, how you said that earlier. What? Sorry?
We already know it.
We already know it, right? So you might think that the problem is, you guys are involved, right? You've been with this. If you're here, you've been with us enough that you sort of get, I see what's going on here. You may not get it the frame I'm using right now, but you see what's going on here. But to the ordinary person, we say, well, think of it this way. If you really want to know what we do, we're trying to get politicians, academics, politicians, public intellectuals stop lying to you. I mean, essentially, that's what we're trying to do, right? He says, if you understand that, that's great. The idea that such a thing is possible, well, it's freaking inconceivable, isn't it? Do you expect rational resistance to what we're suggesting? And then when it takes someone like you to grasp it, and me someone a couple of hours to explain it, is it rational that they would resist it? So, I look back at Darwin and say, okay, he had some challenges, but he could have gotten hung, right? But there are still people that fight against that today. If you look at us, I expect the same treatment, but worse. Because it's one thing to say, the planets work that way, great. Well, that doesn't affect how I feel about the universe. It doesn't affect me. It's another thing to say that, evolution worked that way. Well, that offends my moral code and it brings into question my faith. But, does it really affect me other than that? When you bring in genetics, you say, holy shit, I don't want genetics to be as deterministic as they are, because it turns out they're hella deterministic. So when you look at genetics, you don't want to be that. But how does it really affect you? It affects you when you have to sort of say, well, I guess we can't all look like Josh. So I can't play basketball, right? I mean, even if I was tall enough, I'm probably not coordinated enough. Anyway, so that brings it up. But when you start telling people what you think, feel, intuit is mechanical production of all these things overlaid with a bunch of excuses to get stuff, then it hurts. It makes it real, it makes it personal. And now if you were in this age, we've said, well, we've tried to let loose women, the whole, what's happened there, right? In the feminist movement, and et cetera. And we've had this expansion of the feminine. How do you say, holy shit, it's the feminine means of lying, deceiving, cheating, and undermining and warfare that's brought us to this condition? Do you want to say that in public? I'm telling you, I don't. So I don't expect our job to be easy. And I don't, right? I expect us, and this is important. I don't expect our job to be easy. I don't expect a revolution to prevent a civil war to be easy. I don't expect people to need to understand the shit I've talked about for the past 25 minutes, to be able to understand they're screwed by criminals who are raping, pillaging, and destroying them, their progeny, their future, and all the capital that's been brought up that produced by their ancestors that made it possible for them to enjoy the lives, opportunities, consumption, and silly ideas that they currently possess. The luxury ideas, what is it called? Luxury status, luxury idea. What's the luxury beliefs? Yeah. Yes, luxury beliefs. The fact that you have the luxury of stupid ideas is a capital contribution of your ancestors and nothing to do with your virtue signaling ass. Matter of fact, we can show you that your luxury beliefs are actually an attempt to engage in crime. So do you expect people to walk up to us like they did to Marx and say, "What, free shit?" You know, I had... thankfully, what's her name? Megan Usui, brought together us, me, Kevin McDonald, Tom Sunick, and Ricardo Duchesne in New York a few years ago. And they're all talking about what they want the public to understand. And I said, yeah, but what do you got to sell? Responsibility? What do you think the opposite side sells? What's the difference in the end between men and women? Responsibility. If you want to understand any for female behavior that's different from male, figure out what responsibility they're trying to avoid. If you want to understand any leftist behavior that's different from the conservative, try to figure out what responsibility they're trying to avoid, because that's what's driving the difference. That's how simple it is, how obvious it is, how reductive it is. There's nothing else to it. And that's one of the pains of the simplicity of what we teach, is that, God, it really is that simple? How humiliating. Brad says, no, Curt, it's just humbling. Well, you're humbling because you're not as arrogant as I am. To me, I'm insulted that I didn't see the obvious earlier. So we face a challenge. We face a challenge in actually having a solution to the crisis. Not only is it a crisis of our age, but it's a solution to the repetition of this crisis forever. That's what we're selling. Great. But I got to be responsible to make that happen? You mean I got to show up to demand it? Because you don't think the government's going to say, anybody in the government, the bureaucracy, the media, the academy, that lives off this talking class, right, that lives off their rent-seeking, extraction, undermining, sedition, and destruction of responsibility, that's what they're selling, right? They're all selling irresponsibility. You don't think they're going to give up profiting from that, do you? I mean, if I'm a heroin dealer, I'm not giving that up unless you come up with cocaine. So criminals don't give up their crimes, and whenever they can justify it. Have you ever seen a feminine mind try to accept responsibility for their misbehavior, their criminality, their sedition, their undermining, their distraction, their evasion, their loading, framing, obscuring, fictionalism, deceit, justification, moralizing? I can't go through the whole GSSRM list off the top of my head.
They were to take responsibility for that. They would stop being a feminine mind.
Exactly.
Or the other thing, they had a good father.
Right. Well, I mean, again, you're going to go down to you're going to reach the level you are so good at reaching, and I'm trying to keep it up there in the air. So that doesn't mean stop. It just means that I'm drawing attention to it. You're correct. But what happens when a woman has 3 or more kids?
She becomes cognitively masculine.
Yes, she becomes responsible. She's cognitively masculine. But now she has to focus on the feelings of those things instead of the feelings in here. Because she doesn't realize that the feelings that she's been given, she's evolved with, exist not for her to feel. She doesn't matter. The extension, her hyper-empathy is the ability to extend her prefrontal cortex over her flock of children and other women's children, frankly. Just as our prefrontal cortex is evolved to look at time and space, politics, resources, risk, disgust, right? A lot of conservatism, they don't like our disgust response. I'm like, well, I mean, women can clean babies, and I just think that's revolting as all hell, right? I was supposed to get a more laugh than it did anyway. But so the women's disgust response is slightly different. It's more of a fear response, and they're more likely to be worried about feelings and tastes and things like that. Well, we're more worried about the intertemporal, the scale problems. So this is what I say. Of course, Kant's a male. He would come up with the golden rule of what would you have? Well, ethics is basically the study of what would happen if everybody did that. Right? That's so male. The other question is, why can't we get the female version is everybody should do this? So do you want to be the guy in this age that goes out and says, well, it's women. It's the feminine. It's not just women, it's the feminine, right? And it's the men who are feminine and the men who specialize in warfare by the feminine who actually capable of seizing the feminine. So do we have an easy job ahead of us? No. I mean, I'm pretty stubborn. Oh, Brandon's way more stubborn than I am. But I'm pretty stubborn. And I'll keep at it, right? But it's not, we shouldn't look at it like it's easy. And we shouldn't look at it like you need to understand all this shit that we're doing. People only need to know what policy offerings we're putting in place that will make them better and stop them being the victims of criminals. So when Moritz says we're shifting, that's right. I've spent most of my adult life trying to solve this problem. We've spent the past year, it's more than a year now, or it's a year now, more than a year now, of saying we're going to start going public because the research and development is done, but we need to start on our outreach. It's been 11 months? Okay, so it's about a year. And then next year, we're going to try to work on the outreach, not being the stuff I'm talking to you about because you're basically the intellectual class of this kind of thing, or the advocacy class of it. And we got to switch to what do we actually got to talk about so that people actually give a shit?
How will this impact you positively and stop you from being screwed up?
Yes, correct, yes. Because that's what they want. They want to see step A to step B. That's it. The other problem we have, there's two more faces of the problem, is that the left on the triangle, the left converges and the right diverges. That's the other problem we have. And that's actually the failure point. That's our problem. That's the real issue, is the masculine mind tends to find a way of asserting dominance by demonstration of some social or political competency or economic competency. And once they have that, they stick with it and become a victim of the anchoring problem that I started this conversation with, is their inability to adapt. And so the real problem is preventing the right from suicide no matter what we do.
We need a pack of packs.
Correct. We have to give people the tools to work in their frame, but pursue the same goal. But you're still going to have, there's some group of guys, I want the Pope to be in charge. There's some group of guys that say, I want a Hitlerian authoritarian in charge. There's some libertarians that, I don't know, there might be no living conscious libertarians, and Martin's done with them. But the libertarians still think that, their dream world of adolescent male free will be brought about. So we have this incredible spectrum. Meanwhile, there's people on the center left that will very unlikely disagree with us on anything. All right, so we've got challenges. Right, we got an understanding of what we're offering. It's no small thing, right? Does everybody here understand how profound it is we're doing? Right? How profound our solutions are, how long-lasting and durable are. They're not just for us, they're for all of European civilization, and by extension, they will bleed in like the rest of our science to the rest of mankind. What we're doing is profound. We've got some resistance that we have to overcome. We can shift our positioning to overcome that resistance. But we have So my job today, for the rest of the day, is to try to convince you there's an avenue of success. And at the same time, convince you and others by the videos that there are avenues that you want to be successful, that you wish could be successful, that are suicidal. So I'm going to try to put some opportunities on the field and take other opportunities off the field by giving the success criteria and a couple of stories to do it.